Welcome, everyone, to the Be Freaking Awesome podcast. I am one of your hosts, Sami Kinnison, joined by Angela Belford. And today we are going to be having a conversation about travel and some other fun things with Felicia LaTour. Angela, do you want to introduce Felicia, or do you want Felicia to introduce yourself? Tell us
a little bit. I would love to start just a little bit. Number one, we have another international guest all the way from Montreal, Canada. Very excited to have. We kind of talked a little bit about this. I'm married to a Canadian. He has a definite predisposition to assume things about people from Quebec. We'll call it a predisposition. And so when we meet people that don't fit into that mold, then we're very intrigued, of course. Anyway, so we were on a tour from San Jose, going to La Fortuna to see the volcano, and on our way our bus driver stopped to show us the world's largest Oscar, and we couldn't understand what he was saying. And when we get out of the bus, Felicia walks over to me and says, he was saying ox cart, right? Ox cart, not Oscar. And I was like, oh, I'm so glad I was not the only one. And so thus began the very long day. It was a 14-hour bus tour, and we hung out most of the day. And so by the end of the day, I was like, you got to come on the podcast. You've got so many interesting ideas. We met up later on the trip in Manuel Antonio for dinner. It was lovely. So I had that week told a friend that I didn't like traveling to places that I didn't know the language because it was harder to meet people. And here we have. I will get around that. Anyway, so Felicia, why don't you tell us a little bit about you? That's the context why we're here, but tell us about you.
Well, thank you for having me. And I understand Barry, your husband, and Sami, your dad's predisposition, because it is political, this French-English divide in Canada. And I would like to throw in a little specification for your listeners who might not know a lot about French-speaking communities in Canada. But Quebec is a province, like an American state, that is mostly French-speaking. And you actually find a lot of people like my dad growing up who don't speak English. It's and some people have trouble wrapping their heads around, there are people in Canada who don't speak English, but it's really that French. But I grew up in Ottawa, which is right on the border of Ontario and Quebec. And Ontario is where Toronto is. It's famously a very English-speaking province. So I kind of always had my feet in both worlds. And my mom is Welsh, and she immigrated to Canada as a child. So I really I think I have this privilege of two identities, and maybe why I'm not your typical. And there's so many kind, beautiful Quebecers out there.
Indeed.
But yes, especially while traveling, there's sort of a negative stereotype that they all hang out together and just speak French and have a little bit of mistrust or hostility towards English speakers. But I could talk about that at length living in Montreal, since I didn't grow up here. But I would say, to introduce myself, I'm 30. I love that big round number, so I'm going to plug it. And I currently work as a journalist and editor for Radio-Canada, which is Canada's French language public broadcaster, not unlike NPR. And I also have some creative theatrical pursuits on the side. And I'm a Gemini. I don't know what else to say.
I love it.
I do think it's also interesting that you bring up, just the French speaking, sometimes personalities. I know in our podcast where right after Angela got back from Costa Rica, she talked about how she has maybe had one or two bad experiences with people who are French speaking who did not speak English and help her. So adding to some of that, people are like, I don't understand why you would feel that way. Also some of the, Canadian, I almost said lore, folklore, but that's not really what it is. Climate, social climate, that kind of thing. Anyway, so
I think it's also in Canada, it's such a dichotomy because Canadians are sort of known for being a little bit overly friendly. Like, oh, I'm so sorry I stepped on your toe. Or no, I'm sorry, you stepped on my toe. I'm sorry, my toe was in the way. My foot was in the way. Like there's a little bit of over soaring. Yeah. That's how I actually picked up all the Canadians. I played Canadian bingo in Costa Rica. I forgot to say, I met somebody from every province except Alberta. I didn't get Alberta until the very last day. I was so excited.
Leave Alberta.
That's I forget. Somebody told me where they were, and then I would have to caveat to all the Canadians, be like, I mean, we don't count the Maritimes. And in America, everybody's like, I have no idea what you're talking. Like, what are you saying? You're saying words. I'm like, well, welcome to being married to a Canadian for 30 years.
I was born in Nova Scotia, so
for bingo, we just yeah, I do count.
But you
them.
don't count them because they're so small.
I just could never find anybody, so I would lose the bingo game.
That's your free space? Is that what you're saying? You're gonna
that was my free space, was the Maritimes.
There you go.
Yeah. It's the weirdest thing. I met more people from Canada than I did from America in that 5 weeks. I thought that was fascinating.
That's because snowbirds.
Snowbirds are real.
Totally.
Yeah. Anyway, maybe because when they said sorry all the time, I would go, "Where are you from?" And I didn't do that as much to the people from Philly, Yeah. Anyway. But you love to travel.
I do.
Yes. Have you always loved to travel? Where did that come from?
Great question. I believe pretty staunchly in, intergenerational things that get passed down, whether explicitly or implicitly. And when I look at my ancestors, there's a lot of movement. And my, grandmother did an ancestry test, and it was like all of Europe puked on her DNA. She has every single Russian, Polish, French, Irish, and strictly what Europe, west of the Ural Mountains, so not like Turkey or anyway. But because my mom is Welsh, I was very lucky as a child to go back and forth to the UK a few times, and because I have a lot of family there, sometimes we would meet up. When I was 16, our family spent a month in Italy together, and don't think I really knew at the time that it was not something that all kids get to experience, and probably was a bratty teenager and complaining about how old and dusty Italy was. I'm ashamed to say. I just want to watch TV. But when I turned 23, I decided to go to New Zealand by myself. I literally couldn't have picked a further place. I mean, it's still in the Commonwealth. It's an English-speaking country and has very similar history to Canada. And when you think about colonization, and so I went to New Zealand, and that's sort of where my solo travel bug started. And I do really like to travel, but it's interesting as I'm getting older that I'm curious about why, what makes humans want to travel. And especially given our current climate context, reckoning the ethics of responsible travel and, air travel and how polluting it is, et cetera, with wanting to open myself up to new experiences. So yeah, definitely thinking about those things.
I love that. And I think I have some similar, not as much of that, of my parents who really introduced me to travel, and having that my dad was Canadian. I didn't get to go across the Atlantic, but I did get to go to Canada pretty frequently growing up. And so we spent a lot of time around Toronto, around Windsor, and we hit a point where we would, there were 5 of us in our family, and it was cheaper to drive to Canada than it was to fly. And so I'm now really comfortable with 20-hour road trips. I'm like, yeah, that sounds about standard. What do you 8 hours is one shift of driving in a road trip. What are you talking about? That's nothing. Totally. And so I have 2 small kids, a 4-year-old and a 9-month-old, and I'm trying really hard to figure out how to implant them with this love of travel while also keeping my sanity, because traveling with 2 littles is a lot. It's a whole lot. And I'm like, maybe we get to plant the travel bug as they get a little older and require less naps and have a few less tantrums. But we'll stick to local travel. They don't appreciate the international travel just yet. So
totally. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Go ahead, Angela.
We had an exchange student from Brazil, and when he came, he had never been in a car longer than 3 hours ever. He was 18, and he was like, that was when there was the highway was gridlocked and it was across town. And so when he gets to our house, he was in competitive soccer, and his first tournament was in Dallas, just 5 hours. And we're like, yeah, no big deal. Let's go. We're leaving after work on Friday, and we're going. And he, after that trip, was like, oh my gosh, what is wrong with you people that you will spend just so long? And so any of his soccer tournaments, we were going because of him. They would be often, he was 18, he was in the U18 league. So you had to travel a little farther. There weren't as much competition locally. Anyway, he'd be like, how long is this trip? How long? He did not, by the end of the year, was like, I will not miss riding in a car. This is just terrible. So there is something to be said about learning to love it early. I think that's helpful. Maybe you can be bit by the travel bug later. But sometimes people tell me that some of the reasons people don't travel is, one, you mentioned solo. They don't want to go by themselves. So tell me about that journey of being comfortable traveling solo.
Oh, well, it's so multifaceted. I think I would start with the obvious one is I'm afraid I'm going to be lonely. And that is just a life lesson that, yes, there's so many wonderful advantages to being partnered. And part of my life, there's definitely been like times where I'm like, oh, I wish I had a girlfriend right now just to hold me. But at the same time, I have a colleague who has 2 young kids who's constantly reminding me of this. She's like, Felicia, you get to go home tonight and like go on the couch, and like if you want, you can have craft dinner for your supper and like leave the dish in the sink and just watch TV for hours. You know how much I would pay to do that. So there are a lot of advantages to being single, and the same goes with solo travel, that yes, there are moments where you're kind of like craving a bit of, for me, I'm a huge external processor. So yes, I want to be able to talk about what I'm seeing and experiencing with others, but I could go on with like the list of when you're alone, you kind of attract people like other travelers and even locals because you're not with anyone. So there's not like that social block that people can't come up and talk to you. I think, Angela, if I had been with someone, I might have been like less inclined to start like small talk with you. And then we just latched onto each other. But then other than being lonely, there's just the very real fact, especially as a woman, of security and safety. And a lot of people have concerns depending on where they're going as well. Am I going to feel safe? And it is scary. Like I feel like a pretty seasoned traveler at this point, and so you like learn tips and tricks, but there's no denying that if your physical safety feels threatened, that's a really unpleasant experience, especially abroad. And like you were saying in past episodes, when you don't speak the language, your nervous system is like heightened because verbal communication is really how we operate as humans. So when that's taken away from you, that's like a layer of security that's taken away as well. How do you overcome that? I think a lot of it is embracing the unknown and just using common sense. And unfortunately, having a lot of those self-defense strategies until the day that we start teaching boys and men, like not to assault women, the women are going to continue to use the strategies of like keeping themselves safe because you just never know. And we both throw our hands up in the air because, let's just teach the men to stop assaulting people. Like it just, I say it in a very like dramatic way of like, surely it would be that simple. Surely it could be that simple. Anyway, I take the role of raising 2 small boys. Like
we're going to do it different. We're going to make it right. And I'm going to raise my two little feminists to go out there and take on the world for good, all those things. So, yeah.
You bring up safety and you stay in hostels a lot. And that has been something that I've heard people are like, oh, that doesn't feel safe to me. And so tell me, somebody that has done what I was gathering from our day at the hot springs
in the volcano.
Yep. There was we went to the La Fortuna volcanic hot springs, a resort that is, what did they say? The water rolls over the volcanic rock or something, some such as that. I'm not sure how they do that and have different temperatures, but whatever. It was a lovely day, lovely resort. But tell me about hostel, like traveling and staying in hostels.
Do you feel unsafe?
Do you feel safe? Yeah.
I feel very safe. I had a bad experience doing couch surfing that kind of put me off couch surfing. That was in Paris. And like this man like legit tried to assault me and I had to run away and it was horrible. And I feel very lucky in a way. Lucky is horrible, but that I wasn't harmed and I got away and I reported him right away to the website and everything, and his account was taken down. But hostels, I've shared a room with 7 guys and I was the only woman. And my only complaint is that it was stinky. I felt safe because like everyone, when no one knows each other, there's kind of more of a tabula rasa, blank slate. Whereas if I like went to a frat house to stay for the night and all the guys know each other, then it's like a little, you're afraid of the ganging up effect. I want to acknowledge too that I have a certain amount of privilege and this is going to sound weird because we hear about white privilege a lot, but like I have tall privilege. I'm a 6 foot tall woman. I work out. So I'm like kind of strong looking. And I feel as though, unfortunately, people who want to do harm unto others are looking for easy targets. And I don't necessarily fit that mold. So maybe that's what's giving me this false sense of, or real sense of security. But I'm curious, like when you hear from people that hostels don't feel safe, like what are you hearing? I think
it's the idea of staying with strangers and like what could happen. Why would you let your guard down and go to sleep in a room of strangers? Like that sounds terrifying. And I in an element, you are entering into the same, like the other person who's other strangers are accepting the same risk that you are accepting. That like, I'm going to go to sleep in front of strangers. And there's just an element of like, whatever harm could happen to you could happen to them. Why would each of you, I don't know, disrespect the space? There's like a shared agreement. I don't know. It feels like a mutual, we are all here. We're not going to, I don't know.
There's a fellow traveler aspect to it. And I have stayed, when I solo traveled, I've stayed in a hostel, much to the chagrin of my family. They did not like it at all that I did that. And I wasn't in it. I was in a private. I mean, it ended up being, they had room and had a private room, but still it was like when I had booked it, nobody knew that. And so I would totally do it. I'm not often a solo traveler. I'm often with a spouse who has a much more highly keen, activated nervous system. And he has gotten dramatically better at being less fearful about travel. Many people say I don't have enough safety concerns, my own personal safety. I use the privilege of just confidence because, like you said, people that are looking to assault someone are often looking for somebody that is weaker. And so when you walk around looking like you're in charge and that you run things, and even when I don't feel that way, I will of course I'm looking up and I'm looking out and I'm, paying attention and I'm greeting people. I'm also, because I feel like that humanizes. So I make eye contact with strangers. I smile at them. I say hello, which when you're walking around at 11 o'clock at night in San Francisco and you have to step over people sleeping on the sidewalk, then that feels horrifying to people. Now, nobody would be shocked by that because I've done many years of homeless advocacy, but I have just I don't know. People don't scare me. Desperation scares me and drugs scare me. And so I like to look at people in the eye because I think you have an indicator sooner that they seem desperate or that they might be under influence of drugs. But in general, I feel like that people are not unsafe situations. And we could get into the whole, like, what are the strict systems of government and systems of power and systems of privilege that cause people to be in desperation? But that's not what today's about. Just so all y'all know, in case we're not discounting or dismissing the privilege aspect of this and what causes desperation. We just are going to stay focused today.
Yeah.
Speaking
Can
of,
I go back? Sorry.
Go ahead. Nope, you go.
I also just want to say, like, hearing back what you were saying about having like a certain confidence, someone who wants to do you harm will do it. And it doesn't matter what you look like. Like, I think I tell myself that I'm less of a target to make myself feel better, but there are incredibly like, and it doesn't make people who are assaulted like weaker looking. Like, I want to have that nuance.
Yes. Thank you.
And it's interesting what you say about looking people in the eye, because when I lived in Berlin, I came across a lot of people in situations of homelessness and a lot of people in situations of addiction. And the one piece of advice that my friend who's a social worker made, because there are a lot of like lost souls wandering the streets and you want to help everyone, but you can't. And the one kind of person that she said, like, you just need to leave them be, is someone in psychosis. And you can tell by their babbling. And she's like, if you start looking them in the eye, now you're part of the mini psychotic world that they're building. And that can become dangerous for you because it can get volatile very quickly. You don't know what like they're seeing. And so just like, if it feels dehumanizing, but just let them be, it's safer that way for both of you.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, that's what it was a good piece of advice.
I say desperation and I'm probably in drugs, but I should probably add, and obvious mental illness is another one that, yes, treat with kid gloves. I'm not saying I walk up and hug everybody, but look at them enough to assess is a good caveat. Thank you for that.
Another reason that people talk about that they don't travel a lot is the cost, I think, and that it can get really expensive. And from what Angela has shared with me, you have found a little bit of a way kind of around that in some cases. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. Well, there's always going to be the plane tickets. And unless, someone who knows someone who gets free tickets for some reason, like, you kind of have to pay for those up front. So I do save a lot for that. But usually my goal when I travel to a new place is to spend the least amount of money as possible, both as kind of a personal challenge and a budget reality. So my way of, I think the biggest money sucker is accommodation, because it's not like you're paying rent, which in most cities now is getting a little out of control, Montreal included, but staying overnight, whether it's a hostel, like a hostel can easily be 30 Canadian, which is what, like 22, 23 American a night. That adds up even, and that's the lowest budget thing. So early on, I had a boyfriend who was doing something called woofing. And WWOOF sounds like a weird dog thing. It's an acronym.
Like old people are going to think we're talking about some drug use in the 70s, but none of those kids, things.
Those kids and their woofing.
It was huffing, not woofing, guys. Okay, keep listening.
I heard about a girl who woofed once, ruined her life. No, woofed like changed my life for the better. And it's an acronym for Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. And there are networks that exist in almost every country in the world, where usually farmers, sometimes there's a looser definition of a farm, will host volunteers from around the world. The basic arrangement, and this can vary, is 5 hours of work a day for 5 days a week in exchange for accommodation, so the biggest money concern, and food. And that's a huge one. And for me, the bonus too is you're with locals. So you're getting a much more authentic experience of a place normally, if it's a good place. And you have days off, so you can still travel, and like afternoons off. So I have only had, I've done it at least at least 20 different places now in my life. And I've only had 2 experiences that were mildly unpleasant, but I probably would go back because they still taught me something. So
wait, you're 30 and you have done 20 separate trips whooping.
20 separate
farms. Oh, okay. So
like New Zealand was one trip and I went to 10 different places in the span of 4 months. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. I want to preserve the reaction I had when you told me when I was like in the volcanic springs, because I was like, what? That's the coolest thing on the planet. I think that is amazing. So give us an example, maybe besides New Zealand or at New Zealand, whatever. Like what does your life look like? So you arrive, when do you work? What kind of work do you do? Give us some examples.
Yeah. Once I went to Iceland with my sister, and we ended up in the east of the country, which has less volcanic activity because Iceland is known for its geothermic energy, and they use that for farming. But we were in a pretty cold part, and it was end of October. And at least in Canada, like the harvest is over. But they were still harvesting things like barley and kale and a lot of hardy winter crops or like late fall crops. So it was get up, breakfast, and then out in the field for at least 3 hours, and then, break for lunch. And I got to see my sister break down and cry multiple times. And my sister's tough. Like, she's done tree planting. But it's true that it was cold and you're like picking kale, and it's not for the faint of heart if physical discomfort isn't your bag. But it is mine, weirdly. And then in the afternoon, for a couple hours, we were preserving, because so much of, especially like Nordic countries, they have to think, oh, we don't have access to tomatoes and bananas and avocados year round. So we have to like preserve the food that we can grow here. So we were making sauerkraut and kimchi and different foods from the things that we were harvesting in a beautiful big industrial kitchen. And that was a really cool experience because I took away a lot of knowledge, but it was in Iceland. I mean, it's not, if it wasn't on planet Earth, I would feel like I was in a different universe, because it's just mind-blowingly beautiful. And the Northern Lights every night just is like a free show.
Yeah, you don't have to spend money to see those.
No, that's yeah. Sometimes we forget that nature kind of gives us the best entertainment.
Yeah. That's so cool.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Was there one that was maybe less painful?
Yeah, because I'm curious about you too. But well, one in New Zealand was a butterfly conservation project. And I was just like handling tiny little monarch eggs and making sure that they're like in every cage. There was like a good, because there were, the egg spaces and the caterpillar spaces and the pupa spaces and the butterfly, just making sure that they're all optimal. And I'm not a butterfly expert, so I had to like learn on the spot, what they need and how to handle them and things like that. But honestly, it was a woman who was doing it. And some of the work was like, you want to bring my dog to the dog training class? Because I don't have time today. Like, it's not always like farm work. Sometimes the people are a bit more flexible with the tasks you're doing.
Yeah.
But it worked for me. I mean, you're feeding me and you're housing me. And you can always say no. Like, that's the thing. It's very consent based. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Amazing. I know it's just like outside of I've heard of such unicorns using volunteerism, but
Yeah.
it was so fun to meet one.
Meet one. Meet a unicorn.
Meet a unicorn. I've declared.
But let me ask you, do you think, based on like where geographically you would like to go travel, that you could see yourselves doing it, and what kind of tasks would you enjoy? Like a really typical one is, I would love to go to Tuscany and wow, I could work on a vineyard and like stomp grapes.
That would be really fun. I like that idea.
Popular.
We had a grape arbor at my parents' house growing up. Just one, not the vineyard amount needed. And that was something that we did growing up, is you'd go pick the grapes and, spend a lot of time doing that. But I have a lot of big cities that I want to go to. So it's hard to think about like the farming tasks near that. There's
always urban farming.
Ooh, that's a good thing to think about. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure in another universe, another timeline of me moved from mid-sized town in Arkansas to go live in a big city and sell my car and never ride in a car ever again. But that's not this timeline that I'm in. But I just have such a draw to, I don't know, the busyness of cities. And that's one of the things that I love, to travel to places where it just always feels alive. And I know that then like there are plenty of places that are really exciting and fun and alive that aren't big cities. And that's my travel bias, is I'm like, no, I want to go to the city, not the countryside. My husband is the opposite. So, which is a good balance that we can then experience some of both. So,
yeah.
Ironically, I would probably be willing to go to Barcelona. And I was going to say ironically, because my first thought was like, I would go back to the countryside of France. I met some just lovely, lovely people, and I would love to go and explore vineyards there. But it is a big item on our bucket list to go spend a lot more time in Barcelona and just really get a chance to slow travel there. And so I would probably be apt to try something like that if I were going to go somewhere. But anyway.
And you don't realize that as native English speakers, you automatically have this very, like, what's the word? In demand skill. There's so many international people who just, like, they would literally say, hey, if you can come and stay with me and talk English with me for most of the day, like that would be your work, because so many people want to improve their English skills. And you don't necessarily have to be a sort of certified teacher for that.
Yeah, I got to go to the Netherlands when I graduated high school. And I just remembered, like, I had learned a little bit of Dutch, not a whole lot. And I was like, oh, I want to like practice. And no one would let me practice my Dutch because they were like, I want to practice my English. This is so exciting.
Dutch people are so annoyingly good at English as well. Like, my English is horrid. And you're like, shut up. Like, my Dutch is, limited to Dankjewel. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was pretty limited as well. But I remember going to the grocery store and like trying to, kind of get by. And then they would immediately be like, oh, you speak English? I'm going to speak English to you now the whole time. Now, the one day I went looking for cheese to make a homemade mac and cheese, there was no one there to speak English to me. And I'm telling you, they have hundreds of kinds of cheeses. And you're like, what cheese should I pick to make homemade mac and cheese? Like, this could go very poorly. So there was no one there that day, but every other day couldn't stop finding people who could speak English. So yeah, it was a good time. We ended up with an old smoked Gouda, and it worked out well. So
okay, awesome. Cute. I'm really glad that story had a cheesy resolution, because I was desperate to know what you chose.
You were like, wait, what's the end of that story? You can't leave us hanging there.
Yeah, you did it. You
should get some cheese. Oh no, I had to buy 4 different kinds to get the right kind. No, never a bad problem to have too much cheese. So if somebody wanted to get started with this, what do you recommend for people wanting to try this out and try to keep their nervous system calm and safe.
Yeah, totally. Well, you can always, you don't have to travel alone to do it. Like couples do it all the time. I even met a couple in their 60s who retired from their own farm. They gave it to their kids, and then they started traveling the world woofing to learn about other agricultural practices in other countries.
That's so cool.
That is so cool.
Yeah, they're kind of my heroes. I would say, well, the internet is your best friend in this case. There are websites devoted to this kind of thing. If not necessarily agriculture is your bag, there's Workaway and other such websites where you pay for one membership, and then it kind of gives you access to profiles all over the world for a year. I want to say it's like 30 to 40 US. And then you can write, and there's tons of advice on these platforms that's probably better read anyway, like tips and tricks of how to find good hosts and things that I won't go over. But because I have more experience with woofing, I would say since the woofing websites are limited to countries, so there's like Woof Canada, Woof US, Woof Italy, Woof France, and then like sometimes smaller countries will band together. So there's Woof Central America. So maybe like make a top 3 of the kind of places you want to go to, and then start having before buying an account, have like a little sneak peek at the websites. And then when you know where you want to go, dive into the deep end, buy a membership, and just be really clear. It's an incredible exercise in boundary setting, in stating your needs. If you're someone who knows like you need 10 cigarettes a day, don't lie to yourself and go to a place that says strictly no smoking. I don't know why I brought that up as an example, but it's like a good, clear, if you know that you're someone who needs meat, there's a lot of places that are vegan only. And if you know that you can't, like you have a back problem, you can't lift a certain amount of weight, have a look, like read the fine print. And reviews are your best friend. Like when you're buying a dishwasher, you read the reviews before committing. So it's like, if you're going to go spend time with a bunch of strangers and there's maybe like one review, you can go. I've done that, but usually it ends up being so because normally people only are going to leave a review for a place they really liked. So if a place has that like minimum 10 5-star reviews, that's a good sign. And to calm your nervous system, well, just like maybe visualize what it's going to be like being in that place, doing the work. And if there are like little question marks or exclamation marks popping up, any host worth their salt will answer your questions beforehand with grace and reassurance. So
I recently,
they would want you to do a good job too, right? Like they wouldn't want you. So they're going to want to help you. You're not probably going to be thrown into a task, no training. Otherwise, you're doing them a disservice to do it poorly.
That's right.
I just read this thing this week on nervous system. And when you said this, it reminded me of keeping your nervous system calm is, for new experiences especially, is, yes, imagining you doing this, but imagine yourself after you've done it and you're like telling the stories of like you've had the experience. And the idea is like, do you want to become a person that does new experiences and that you have new adventures in your life? And so imagine yourself having completed it. And it helps you to kind of almost see this good thing that's going to come, so that even when you hit the bumps along the way, it helps you to go, oh, well, this will just be a great story. What is there's a favorite song I have. I love this song.
AJR, 100 Bad Days.
Yes.
And the chorus is 100 bad days means 100 good stories, and 100 good stories means I'm interesting at parties. And there's it makes me laugh because there are times where I'll have a day and I'll be like, good, at least I'll be interesting at parties now. Like, have something to come of this.
Well, thank you so much for coming. Do you have any kind of parting remarks? What would you leave us with?
Ooh, Well, maybe one final note on solo travel and piggybacking on your last episode talking about like uncertainty with language. I find the 3 or 4 best phrases to learn are hello, goodbye, thank you, and cheers. And if you can learn those 4 phrases in every language and like say them with complete gusto, you usually make friends pretty quickly. Like people are enthusiastic about people who are enthusiastic about their culture, their language. So that's my parting piece of advice. And really grateful for this time to chat. It was so nice to do this.
It was so nice to chat with you. And I appreciated the opportunity to get to meet you and learn a little bit more about your story. I know you and Angela will always have the volcano in Costa Rica together, but
we'll always have tuna. I feel like that's the scene in Casablanca.
You know what?
Paris.
Exactly.
The volcano.
Next week, I'm going to grab drinks with a new friend. We just became friends that we referred each other some business. And because I went and had drinks with her right before I went, she's like, you have to go to La Fortuna. You have to go to La Fortuna. You have to go. And because she was in my head so soon when we got to San Jose, or when we were planning what we were doing in San Jose, I'm like, let's take the day and go to La Fortuna. I mean, she tells me it's amazing. So I will have to thank her for my friend.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful. And if you're ever this side of the border, you know who to call.
I want to go to Montreal. I want to dispel all the myths. And Sammy's grandmother was born outside of Montreal, so we need to we do need to do some hair. Don't ask me where right now. I will embarrass myself. So,
well, we need to go there. And it's hard to convince Barry that he's like, if we're going to go do tourism in Canada, he's like, no, we'll go other places. So we're going to break him of that. Like, no, we want to go. Want to see the beauty.
Yeah. And today is St. Patrick's Day. This will probably be broadcast on a different day, but does Barry have Irish in him? I feel like he does.
Scottish. I have Irish.
You have Irish.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Everyone's got a little bit of Irish in them, including myself. So that's maybe why I was asking, because there's a huge Scottish and Irish diaspora in Montreal. And that's kind of cool to reconnect with. But if you want to go to the motherland of nature and Irish sounding people, Newfoundland, like it's no one knows about it, but it's really kind of the most interesting place to go in the US and Canada. I said it. Wow. That's a bold statement, but
I loved the Broadway show that was based on the Far Away.
Come From Away.
Come From Away. Oh my gosh, I fell in love and want to go check that out. That was such a fabulous show. Yeah.
Well, that show really underscores the kindness of the people, but you're not ready for the landscape. You're not ready for the fjords and the pristine glacial lakes, and it looks like Mars on some. It's like red and rocky, and it's just insane, but no one knows about it. So hot tip.
I was like, right here, now the world will know now.
You heard it first.
Because the world listens to our
Your
podcast,
listeners.
the whole world.
Yeah, all 8 billion of them.
Yes. Well, thank you guys so much for listening and for joining in on our conversation today. Don't forget. Oh, wait, actually, Felicia, hold on. Sorry, I'm not going to end it, and I'm not going to edit this. Where can we find you? How can we follow your journeys and learn more? Just, keep following along with what you do.
Well, if you want to know more about me, as in Felicia LaTour, who is not the Felicia LaTour in the United States.
Yes.
All distinction. I can be found on Instagram at _tower_of_babble, but spelled BABBLE. As you may have noticed in this conversation. Yeah, great show notes. But for those of you who like the weird and wacky world of drag, especially drag kings, I also have a drag alter ego account. His name is Fabien Lamour. He can be found in the show notes on Instagram as well.
I love it. So exciting. This is good. And I'm glad you got to plug that because I know at the very beginning we mentioned, you said you had creative theatric, I don't know what you called it.
Endeavors.
Endeavors. I was like, extracurriculars is the word in my brain and that's not the right word, but endeavors. So I'm glad you got to actually mention that here at the end. Go follow Felicia on Instagram. And now, without further ado, we hope you guys go and be freaking awesome.
Yeah.